interested in all the various communities that we have here across the United States. So, the Great Commission and mixed metaphors. I just want to be clear that I truly believe that we are all gathered here today to do God's work, and that the Holy Spirit works through us as we invite our Christian brothers and sisters to a renewing encounter with our Lord. I've heard it said before that we do not need to be deliberate or intentional in inviting participants, because God will call them to attend when the time is right. Just have the weekend and they will come type of attitude, that's kind of an homage to the Field of Dreams. It's really a recipe for dwindling attendance and, ultimately the death of the communities that we hold so dear. So, not unlike the Great Commission, as his hands, feet, and voice on earth, I think we always need to be aware that the call to attend the renewal weekend is to come through us. Today, I'm going to talk about ways to be more deliberate and more intentional and ultimately successful in our efforts. As a marketing and salesperson by trade, and as a disciple by the grace of God, I'm going to apologize in advance for what will be plenty of mixed metaphors. I'm going to use words like recruiting, inviting, calling, all meaning the same thing. You'll hear me talk about, marketing pushes and trial closes. Just as I said, forgive me, there's not always a convenient Christian vernacular for some of what we're going to talk about today. But as we all know, it's the Holy Spirit working through us when we're trying to invite people to one of these weekends. So, that is the first part. Clay, you want to change the slide? So, as we get into the real meat and potatoes of this, I want to talk first about what I refer to as scatter shooting. These are all logical things that we can do to make would-be participants aware of our communities and the weekends that we hold. First, we want to make sure that there are the next 2 weekends on our respective church calendars of those who make up your fourth day, and on your presbytery's calendar if you're blessed with their support. And specifically, I said the next 2 weekends. Don't just have the imminent weekend. And even if you have them scheduled, don't put up the next 3 or 4. Just 2. And we'll come back to why that's important. You should also, work to maintain a constant presence on your church's website. Perhaps you could have a Curcio or Pilgrimage tab underneath adult discipleship, if that's something that's on your website. Again, have a constant presence of it in the various ways that your church communicates. You'll want to have something about pilgrimage also in your newsletters if you have those periodically throughout the year. I would say at least quarterly for sure, and then weekly during your recruiting push. If your community has hard copy brochures or registration forms, keep them up to date and conspicuously placed at your church where they can be easily referenced. And then finally, know that absolutely none of the scatter shooting that we've just discussed will ever compel a would-be participant to attend a weekend. Yeah, you heard me correctly. the most we can ever hope for from these scatter sheeting efforts is that we make people aware of our communities and the renewal weekends that we hold and the fourth day that we so cherish. So one of the next things I want to talk about is conscious scheduling. What I speak to there is of the weekends. Here in North Texas, we hold 2 weekends per year, one in the spring and one in the fall. Experience has shown that it's nearly impossible to get would-be participants' attention during the holidays. So recruiting really can't begin for the spring weekend, at least, and be effective until after the first of the year. Please keep this in mind if you're ever considering scheduling a weekend in February. It will make the timeline for your ability to invite people very short. Much the same holds true for a weekend in the fall. You know, you just can't effectively get people's attention during the summer, partly due to access, because so many people are on vacation. And as we all know, there are a lot of people who just kind of take a break during the summertime from church. So your recruiting really can't effectively begin until after the start of the school year for some people, you know, whose life is oriented that way because they have children. And for others, it's not until after Labor Day. So with that in mind, whether it be spring or fall or elsewhere during the year, try not to stymie yourselves by allowing your community less than 60 days for an effective recruiting push. You can almost be guaranteed that it will reduce your potential attendance. You know, why 60 days? You know, you'd have to figure that, you know, you're going to lose the week just before the pilgrimage because most of us have to have our information to the camps and the head counts by then. So it's really a week shorter than that. And you need that time for your efforts of the whole fourth day to get traction. That's just how long it takes. So now we're getting into some more of the more important stuff, like, as I say, making a list and checking it twice. We, all of us in fourth day, should always have a list of would-be participants. And, you know, it would be really easy to say that, well, gosh, I want all of our Christian brothers and sisters to experience a weekend like I had. You know, whether they're members of our own churches or those in a larger group of Christian friends. You know, that's easy to say, but it's probably unmanageable, and it's definitely not deliberate or intentional or focused. That idea is just really more scattershooting. So in order to make a quality list, and these lists should exist for every member of your fourth day, and then they're typically consolidated, most commonly at the church level, but they could be done at a renewal group level or a council level or a moderator and staff level as the weekend approaches. To build those lists, we want to start by doing some profiling. But don't worry, that's in a good way. So these are several very broad brushstroke groups of people that I've been witness to getting a lot out of the weekend. One is what I refer to as the weary servant. You know, these can be the 20% of the people at your church that do 80% of the work. It could be a mother. or a caregiver at home, teachers, pastoral staff. I mean, just think for a minute for those people who spend all day, 7 days a week serving other people. What a respite that a weekend of being served instead of doing the serving could mean to these people. Those people are always touched by the weekend. And we all know people in that situation. Another group of people is just what I refer to as the burdened. And we all know this group because at one time or another, we've probably been part of it. But, you know, we all have our masks, as they say at the weekend. Guilt, shame, loss, failed relationships, hypocrisy, tragedy, etc. You know, the list goes on. And any of these things can be a heavy yoke and can be hard to bear, if not just simply overwhelming. So, not being able to forgive yourself or others who may have wronged you, any of these types of situations, it's just going to stop you dead in your tracks on your faith journey. And a weekend of healing is exactly what these people need if they hope to move on. So, again, be aware of that profile. The unemployed. I love this one. You know, job loss is tough, and, you know, worse yet, what can turn into protracted unemployment. You know, the mental and emotional exhaustion of an unsuccessful job search creates self-doubts about people's value and their worthiness. You know, again, imagine the renewal that could come from a weekend, knowing that when you left, that there was absolutely a place for you in God's kingdom, and that you were worthy, and that you are valuable. That can reinvigorate someone in their job search. And then when I'm talking to people in this category, I also often muse that the perfect time to attend a weekend is when you're unemployed, because you don't even have to ask for time off work. So that is, I find that to be a very low-hanging fruit. That's those seem to be easy people to get to a weekend, especially if your community has scholarship monies that can assist. You know, the next category I have, you know, being a Presbyterian, is the frozen chosen. You know, our churches are full of members who attend regularly, they give regularly, but the fact of the matter is they're just simply walking in place on their faith journey. If you ask anyone in this group what plans they might have in 2018 to enrich their spiritual lives, they won't have an answer. But you do. And that's attending a renewal weekend. Lest we forget our church leadership as another category. Your elders, deacons, committee heads, pastoral staff, they should all have this shared experience of a renewal weekend. Here in the North Texas community, in fact, we scholarship all ordained pastors, and we really do that in hopes of getting top-down endorsement for the weekends and for our community as a whole. I know, too, having been witness to it at several churches, that a church that was stagnant, that became active in the Fourth Day movement, whatever flavor, that it has completely reinvigorated the church and brought new life and new faith and new joy into it. So I think that, as I said, all of our church leadership should have benefit of being part of the Fourth Day. Another category that we might not think of right away is just new members. What better way could there be to get plugged into a new church and a new community than attending a weekend? You go from being a stranger in town or a stranger at a new church to, all of a sudden having a group of friends that you'll be close to for the rest of your life. That's a real logical one. There are others. But one I want to mention to be careful of is that you might also be thinking about people who've lost a loved one, and just always be aware that there is such a thing as too soon in terms of inviting them to attend a weekend. Again, that's one that just be aware of that. I don't think that I would ever talk to someone, though I have seen examples of it, I don't think I would ever talk to someone who are just months out on having lost a loved one. I'm sure already, as we've been talking, that most of y'all have jotted down several names already. Well, congratulations, you've started your list. Encourage other members of your Fourth Day to do the same. And if you have a weekend coming up, or even if you don't, set a time to share and consolidate those lists. Your next step, once you have a list put together, is to, as a group, maybe it's, like I said, maybe it's your church, maybe it's your renewal group, or to some extent your Fourth Day as a whole, just discuss and decide who among you would be the best person to approach a would-be participant. If it's somebody at your church that, there may be half a dozen Fourth Day members that know them, but there's probably one that's closer to them who maybe knows from sharing that they fit in some of these categories that we've talked about. Or maybe it's a person that's the most comfortable in actually doing it. That'll come naturally. But it's important that when you're going to talk to any individual that you take into account, again, who might be best at connecting with that individual. And another reason to do that is because while it often takes a lot of touches before a person finally attends the weekend, having a half a dozen people calling the same person for the same weekend, it'll dilute your effort. It won't strengthen it. So try and make sure that that doesn't happen. As people contact those on the list, make sure that the list, the results are shared and that the list is updated. It should always include, the date of the last time they were talked to by whom, and what the results of that conversation were. Remember that you don't just make these lists going into a weekend, but it should be a living document. It should be a document that goes on, perpetually, always updated, always added to. Obviously, people will roll off, hopefully because they attended a weekend, sometimes perhaps because they just aren't interested. But the document should be alive and, again, always being worked on at a certain level. there are a number of ways where technology can help you do this. Sharing it as a Google Doc would be a great way to collaborate and provide those updates to the list that you have in real time with whomever you're working with on it. This is really what being deliberate and intentional is all about. So now, let's talk about our personal testimonies. I mentioned that before that all of the logical scatter shooting type details that we want to make sure we've taken care of, the best that those efforts will ever do is just make people aware of our communities. Not a single person is going to decide to come because of any of the scatter shooting things. They're going to decide to come because they've received a personal invitation from one of their Christian brothers or sisters with a powerful testimony about how the weekend changed their lives. We all have one. Where we were on our faith journey, whether that be good, bad, or ugly, and where the Holy Spirit took us during our weekend. Whether we sensed it on Sunday at closing, or didn't realize it for weeks or months or until we first staffed. We're all here today because of it. And of course, the more active that you've been in your community, the more often you've had the opportunity to witness the same kind of renewal happening to other people. So to give you an idea of a personal testimony, I've used this often and talking to people about the weekend. I'm going to share with you my own, just like I would over the telephone to someone I'm talking about pilgrimage. So I tell people that, while I would never describe a pilgrimage weekend as a marriage retreat, that my personal experience was this. I was not raised a Christian. I was unchurched until I was out of college. I ended up meeting my wife, a preacher's daughter. And over time, I started to realize that, going to church was the right thing to do. Certainly when we had our children, I felt that way. But, when my faith journey was just beginning, I oftentimes thought about where I was compared to my wife. In fact, I would picture it kind of like a board game. And I would feel like I had just barely gotten out of the starting block and that my wife was already 3 sides around the board in front of me on her faith journey. And there were times when I truly felt that I would never catch up. And worse yet, there were times when I felt I was holding her back. And we went together to a pilgrimage weekend. And that common experience, that common encounter with the Holy Spirit, for me, it was just like picking up a card that says, advance to go. I didn't collect $200, but I got, in a weekend, all the way around the board to where I could start the rest of my faith journey and our lives hand in hand as compared to it such different places on our faith journey. And that changed my life and our relationship. So, we all have a story like that. They're all powerful. And when you hear something like that from a Christian brother or sister who's telling you how meaningful the weekend was for them, that is the kind of thing that is going to, tip the scales for that person in terms of them wanting to have that, a similar type experience as well. Remember too, that there is potential testimony within all the profiles we've spoke of. Real things that you can witness to, even if it's not your own. Because certainly if all of you have staffed a number of times, you've seen the weary servant be re-energized. You've seen the burdened shed their yoke. You've seen new energy in someone who's unemployed as they head back out into the job market. You've seen people get a kickstart in their spiritual lives. So they're simply not just walking in place anymore. As I said, we've all been witness to the effect that a growing Fourth Day community can have on a church and on our church leadership, and really bring about new energy and passion for serving the Lord. So those are all things that you can reach back on. Obviously you don't represent them as your personal experience, but that's powerful witnessing all the same. So, Clay?
Yeah.
Clay? Okay. Why don't we, for a moment, see if there's any questions?
Okay. There is one, and you may be going to talk about this. One question is making the contact itself. You spoke in an earlier presentation about the downside of catching people after church versus a different way. Do you plan to cover that in a little bit, or is that something that would be good to talk about now?
Well, the next section is called Taking It to the Street. So
okay.
That's where we're heading.
Okay. There was one profile too that somebody mentioned about. It had to do with, and I wonder if you'd speak to this just for a second. It had to do with there are people in every congregation who they would love to be involved, they would love to be active, but they're just a little bit bashful, and this weekend might give them the ability to do that.
To blossom, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So these are just categories or profiles that I've observed over time. But no, that is a fantastic thought. It's almost akin to what I mentioned about new members. But at the same time, we know a lot of people who maybe just because they're bashful, they may have been around for a while, but they're still not connected. And so, no, that's a very good point.
One other thing that came in, somebody noted that you call this a renewal weekend as opposed to a retreat weekend. Would you spend a second on that, Dwight?
I will. And it's hard. It's really hard. In fact, I used the word retreat just a moment ago in my personal testimony. I said the word. Don't ever say that word. But I said it. I said, while I would never call a pilgrimage weekend a marriage retreat. So the reason that you never use the word retreat is because people have been to retreats. And not only that, there's a women's retreat at your church and a men's retreat. And, you know, I've done it myself, where I've talked about, oh, you need to come to, you know, the pilgrimage retreat. And people will say, oh, you know, I've already signed up for the ladies retreat. And you know, I kind of just do one of these a year. And so that's a big deal. You should write it in bold letters. Don't ever, ever, ever refer to this as a retreat, because it's so much more than that. Can't stress that enough.
Okay.
Any other questions there? If not, we can move on to the next section. So we're prepared. We've got our guns loaded, as it were. We have a better idea of who we're talking to, who those people actually are in terms of what profile they might fit into. We've got our personal testimony. We've got we've been witness to others that we can share. So now that we're all prepared, where do we go from there? So one thing is much in the same way that I talked about conscious scheduling, and to allow yourself, I said, you know, 60 days of effective recruiting time before a weekend. You need to make sure that when you approach someone about pilgrimage, that you do it in a situation that allows for adequate time and undistracted communication. You know, if you walk up to somebody in church pre-service or post-service and just say, hey, you know, I wanted to talk to you about going to pilgrimage. What do you think? You're doomed to failure. So if I reach out to somebody at church, you know, I'll see them on Sunday, and all I'll ever do is just ask them if I could give them a call later that afternoon, or at whatever time or day they might be free. And over the phone is how I engage 99% of the people I speak with. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with going out for coffee, you know, if that's what you do. But, you know, for me, I do most of it, almost all of it over the phone. It also enables me to do it for other communities and other churches within our community. I generally tell people that I'm glad to call anybody and talk about, you know, a renewal weekend. I just need their name and their phone number, and I need to know something about them. And I'm, you know, I call tons of people I've never met. So when you get comfortable with this, that's the point you'll actually reach. And of course, doing it over the phone enables you to connect with more people. But when I've made a connection and I know I'm going to call somebody, our community happens to have an online registration form. I don't know that every community does. But before I even dial the phone, I bring up the registration form and I research in advance every data point that I can pull from, you know, our church community database. Maybe some of you know, have a directory, you know, that has people's names and addresses and phone numbers. I fill all of that out ahead of time before I've even dialed the phone. And the reason I do that is because if you reach a point during your conversation to where whether they know it or not, somebody has made the decision to go. It's kind of like a bell curve. You know, you talk people up to the top of the bell curve, and that's when people say yes. And then everything that comes after that is just a trip down the backside of the bell curve. So I try and get as much of this done as possible. I mean, most of the time I'll just say to folks, yeah, you know, I already got your name and your address and your phone numbers. You know, I assume that your wife is going to be your emergency contact. You know, I pulled her information off the church website. I got that in here too. You know, all I really need to know is, you know, do you have any allergies and or any special dietary requirements? And that's it. I can take care of getting you registered. And it just makes it that much easier. So again, take the time to do that before you even make a call. You know, of course, you can do much the same with a hard copy if you were going out to a coffee shop. Or if you had your iPad with you, you could do it. Another thing is, whatever you do, don't start your conversation talking about dates, times, and locations. You know, we think a lot of times that those are the basics, you know, and let's start there. Absolutely, positively skip it. You know, start your conversation with sharing with them what the weekend meant to you, your testimony, or those that you've been witness to. And, you know, pick and choose depending on who you're talking to and what profile they might fit into. Almost inevitably, it's going to come around to where after you've said your testimony, they're going to say, so what goes on at the weekend? You know, they might even ask, or it might even say that they've heard that there are secrets. And I think that a lot of people who endeavor to invite people to these weekends, that is a question they dread. You don't even need to worry about it. It's really an opportunity. So when you're faced with that question, you almost always will, I just immediately say, well, sure, I'd be glad to tell you everything about the weekend. And this is what I do. Your schedules may be a little bit different, but this is what I say about North Texas. I said, sure, I'll tell you everything. So, you know, we gather on Thursday during the 5 o'clock hour. If you get there before 5, you're early. If you get there after 6, you're late. You know, we do that to accommodate staggered arrival times because, you know, the people who are coming, it's not just about our church. You know, there's going to be churches from all over North Texas and even beyond. And we'll meet briefly, get acquainted, go to dinner, come back. We'll have introductions of the participants and the staff. And, you know, Thursday's a pretty easy night, and, you know, at a reasonable time. And you'll, you know, get to retire to your room. So the rooms at this camp, they're motel-style rooms. It's just like any one you've ever been to before. You walk in, there's 2 double beds with a nightstand in between them, a dresser, bathrooms in the back, but there's no TV, there's no phone, and there's no free little soaps. So make sure that you bring your own toiletries. And we woke up in the morning. We have chapel every day. We eat breakfast. We'll come back and get together. You get assigned into small groups. And then we'll have some talks. And don't worry, they're not like real long sermons. In fact, most of them are given by lay people. And I can tell you that they're very inspiring. Then we'll go to lunch. Then we'll come back. We'll do more of the same. We'll have dinner. You know, the food at the camp is pretty good for camp food. You know, we can take care of any food allergies that you might have. You know, just let us know. And then, you know, it's Sunday, and we usually finish up by 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and you can be home for dinner on Sunday night. So after going through that, I also typically mention that I talk about the dress. I say, so one thing to know is there's no pretense at these weekends. It's not like church. You want to be comfortable. You know, if at home you would be in a sweatshirt and jeans and tennis shoes, then that's what you wear at Pilgrimage. And, you know, if it's the summertime and you'd be in a t-shirt, shorts, and flops, then that's what you wear. And so by going through that and taking them through it and answering the basic questions about what their room is going to be like, what the dress is going to be like, what the food is going to be like, you know, when I'm done, I just will say to them, so did I touch on everything for you? And 99% of the time, they'll just say, well, I can't imagine anything else I need to know. And that objection, you're past it. You're past anybody's, you know, worries about secrets or surprises. You told them everything about the weekend, while at the same time you told them nothing about the weekend. And like I said, 99% of the time, you're past it. In fact, at that point, that's where I start typically with what in the sales business we call trial closes. So, you know, when they say, no, I think you've told me everything, I can't imagine that I'd have any more questions, then I just say, well, you know, I've already filled out most of your application and can take care of getting you registered. We can do it right now. And they'll either say, sure, or, you know, they'll have some other question. Another trial close might be, so do you think your husband or your wife would like to come with you? You know, you're going to get them to say yes to something. Lots of times they'll ask, if they do have any questions at the end, they'll ask, what are the dates again? Because you remember I said, don't talk about that at first. So if you give them the dates, you know, where you say, yeah, well, the imminent one coming up is on, you know, April 13th through 16th or whatever the dates are. And they're looking at their calendar and they say, oh my gosh, I can't make it. Well, I'll just say, oh, that's fine. So the next one in the fall is, you know, October 16th to 20th or whatever it is. And so since I got your application, you know, almost all the way filled out, why don't we just go ahead and put it in for the fall? And that way you'll know that you have a spot reserved. And, you know, I know a lot can happen between now and the fall, but let me tell you, there are people that have to drop out all the time for one reason or another. And so don't worry about that. But, you know, it's just best to get your space reserved, and that way you can get it on your calendar and we'll have your would-be attendance on our calendar. And that comes back to what I said at the beginning about how you only want to have 2 dates out there. I mean, the reason for your phone call is to sign people up for the imminent weekend that you're having. But if you've talked to someone and shared your testimony and they've gone up that bell curve and they're at the top and they're inspired and they're ready to sign up, even if the dates are bad, you just sign them up for the next one. Anything beyond that could be a distraction. But as long as you have this one and the next one, that's going to take care of 99% of the situations you'll run into. Let's see. You know, some other things we do to increase attendance is oftentimes I'll look at people who registered, whether I registered them or not. And I'll see that somebody from a church that I'm less familiar with than my own has signed up, I won't be shy about giving them a call. I introduce myself as the outreach coordinator, for the community, and that I was so excited to see that they signed up, and then I'll just ask. I said, "So, have you thought about who you wanted to bring along with you?" And it seems like such a simple question, but I can tell you that all it takes is for someone to ask it. We want to be deliberate and intentional about increasing attendance at the weekend. And if somebody's all excited about going and is signed up, why wouldn't they want to share that with their friend or their spouse or their sister or whomever? And so take advantage of that opportunity, create it, and take advantage of it. Another opportunity is leveraging the fact that you might be staffing. If you go to talk to somebody and you go through much of what we've already talked about and pique their interest, maybe it's someone you've talked to several times about the weekend, certainly someone you're close to, for you to say to them, we've been talking about you going to the weekend for, a few years now, and I'm staffing this one. And I would just so love it if you could, honor me by coming to this weekend. It'd be such a pleasure for me to serve you. And there's lots of people who won't say yes for themselves, but they will say yes for a friend, for somebody else. And so, it's actually hard for me to imagine, really, that anybody who staffs isn't directly responsible for inviting at least one of the participants. It's, it really should basically be, at the very least, it should be 1-to-1 if you're staffing. Clay, why don't we open it up to Q&A again? And there'll be some other, nuggets, I think, that'll come out of that.
Okay. One question that came in was the music in describing a weekend, a renewal weekend. The music, once we've been to a weekend, we know how wonderful the music is. But is that a motivator for presenting to a potential participant?
It could be. I certainly wouldn't take a flyer on it and mention it if I didn't already know where it was going to go. I think whomever mentioned that it's a good idea. Gosh, if you're talking to people who play on your praise team at your church, musicians, or if you have a contemporary service, or a praise service, I think most of the time we can kind of be in touch with the people who are just really into the music. Then absolutely, it could be a tool for, another thing that they could look forward to about the weekend. But unless I knew that to be a fact, I would not bring up the music, because you could have some people, like the people who go to your traditional service, maybe they don't appreciate praise music. And, so that's one of those things. Don't mention it unless you already know what their answer is going to be.
Okay. I have unmuted everyone, so if I think it works that way. If you have a question, rather than type it into the chat box, you might make sure that you are unmuted, but I think you can speak it out loud.
I think I still see that they're muted, Clay.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe you need to hit the button again. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, sorry about that. We may start getting feedback. If we do, I'll have to do something. Are there any other questions?
I have one. Clay, I have one.
Okay.
Yes?
Can we tell them if they ask about the weekend, that there'll be surprises, a lot of laughter?
I would not tell them that there is going to be surprises. I know it didn't seem like I rushed through what I tell people about the weekend when I endeavor just to give them so much information that they don't have any more questions. But oftentimes I'll tell them, that I'll just drop in there. Yeah, you'll probably laugh until your sides hurt and you may shed a tear. But let me just tell you what, it's going to be one of the best weekends you ever had. But there's a whole group of people that if you use the word surprise, they're going to shut off like a light switch. So,
okay.
Yeah, so just, I definitely would not say that. The rest of it was a good idea, though. I think people are always looking forward to a joyful weekend. And, I've heard that not all 3-day renewal weekends are joyful. I know a woman who has moderated a great banquet before. And she says, oh, no, it's more of like a breaking down and then building up experience. And, to me, that doesn't sound like anything to look forward to. So, no, mentioning the joy and the fun factor, I think, is a great idea.
Thank you.
Any others? Okay. Dwight, really, really appreciate you. I'm going to stop the recording now. And